Let's get started. Good evening and welcome to tonight's open house. This open house is on the Eglinton Crosstown West Extension project. My name is Amin Gill and I'm the Community Engagement Manager for this project. Again, I'd like to start by thanking you all for joining us tonight. This is our third open house this year and our 25th overall. If you were at our in-person open house in March, some of this material may look familiar to you. Tonight's session is divided into two parts, a presentation and a question and answer period. So we'll get right into it. Next slide, please. Right, so today's presentation will focus on the landscape restoration plan, our approach, and some updates. We'll share some tools and renderings of the elevated guideway, and we'll go over some construction updates and what's next. We'll start today's event with a land acknowledgement. I will take you through that. Let us take a moment to acknowledge that we are on lands that have been and continue to be home to many Indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. We are all treaty people. Many of us has come here as settlers, as immigrants, or involuntarily as part of the transatlantic slave trade, in this generation or generations past. We acknowledge the historic and continued impacts of colonization and the need to work towards meaningful reconciliation with the original caretakers of this land. We acknowledge that Metrolinx operates on territories and lands covered by many treaties that affirm and value the right of Indigenous communities, nations, and peoples. We understand the importance of working towards reconciliation with the original caretakers of this land and will conduct business in a manner that is built on a foundation of trust, respect, and collaboration. All right, so I'll take you through some engagement guidelines for tonight. All attendees do have their videos turned off and microphones muted. Our session tonight, as I said, includes a question and answer component at the end of the presentation. Some of you may have already submitted your questions on the event page. If you do have a question during the presentation, please go to www.metrolinx.com/ecwe_events. To get to the event page, at the bottom, you'll see a Slido where you can submit your questions, and this will also be displayed at the end during the question and answer sessions. So worry not, you will have another chance to get that link. As a reminder, we'll prioritize answering questions that are related to the content being presented tonight. Those questions that are unrelated or that we don't get to tonight will be answered and posted to the event page within 14 business days, so please check back there for updates in the coming days. This open house tonight is focused on the Eglinton Crosstown West Extension project and specifically on restoration along the route. We at Metrolinx do, however, acknowledge that there are many transit projects under construction and others going through assessment phases. To ensure that any questions unrelated to the content being presented tonight are answered, our contact us slide at the end will provide several ways for you to get in touch with us, and from there we can forward your questions to the applicable team so that you receive an answer. This event tonight is being closed captioned and French translation is available upon request. All right, I'll take you through our panel tonight, the presenters. So I'm Amin Gill, I'm the Community Engagement Manager. I have with me Peter Smith, who is a Senior Landscape Architect with DTA, Kristen Deshankelik, who is an arborist with Dillon Consulting, and Mihal Killeen, who is our Guideway Design Manager with Arup. Take us through a brief overview of the project. So Eglinton Crosstown West Extension extends the Crosstown project westward from Mount Dennis to Renforth Station, 9.2 kilometers of a new rapid transit line. We've got 7 new stations, 5 connections to other transit options, including the Up Express, Kitchener GO Train, GO Transit, TTC, and MyWay buses. This project will see 37,500 more people within walking distance to transit and 23,600 more jobs within walking distance to transit. So this is just some of the feedback that we've heard throughout the project. We've shared information and received fantastic insights from the public through online surveys, through open houses, conversations through pop-ups and door-to-door canvassing, and also through community and stakeholder meetings and social media. Some of the things that we've heard include that public community space is a priority for uses surrounding the guideway. We've heard that environmental and wildlife impacts should be considered and mitigated as much as possible, and to reduce tree removals and replant affected areas as much as possible. This input has been received and is being considered as the project moves into a design stage and through our restoration plans. From here, I'll turn it over to Kristen to take us through what's required for successful landscape restoration. Or Peter, sorry.
Yep. It's going to be Peter first. Thank you very much and welcome everybody. We're going to be talking about landscape restoration this evening. As I'm sure everyone is aware, that the construction of the ECWE is having some impact on existing landscapes and considerable impact. And Metrolinx has undertaken the responsibility to restore all of these landscapes, any landscapes that are impacted by the construction of ECWE, to a very high level of quality. We are reaching for the highest level of restoration on the project. And what does that entail? First of all, it means providing healthy soil. Plants grow in soil. If the soil is not healthy, they will not survive. We only use native plants. Native plants are indigenous to the area. They are hardy, but they are also not invasive plants. Invasive plants are those that tend to take over vegetated areas, and we all know that there's plenty of invasive plants in the ECWE area. We designed for diversity. That means a great many different types of species in order to respond best to climate change and to different micro conditions within the environment. The fourth part, and probably one of the most important parts, is to monitor and maintain the landscapes over time. Landscapes are living organisms. They require maintenance, they require care, and especially developing landscapes as the new restored landscapes will be. I think it's important to understand that restoration is not a single act. It's not a matter of simply putting plants in the ground, even if the soil is good. It's an ongoing process that will take many years to come to fruition. Next slide, please. The restoration plan for ECWE is line-wide. It covers all of the areas within the Eglinton Flats areas, which we're all quite familiar with, but it also includes consideration of all of the stations and all of the auxiliary facilities as well, the TPSSs and the emergency exits. In approaching the restoration plan process, we have identified three priorities. Priority one is to restore lands impacted by ECWE construction. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but that is our number one priority. Number two priority, and Kristen will talk about this in a few minutes, is to improve adjacent lands. By adjacent lands, we mean lands that are not impacted by construction, but are adjacent to lands that are constructed. And Kristen will tell us why that's important in a few minutes. The third priority is to enhance additional landscapes beyond the actual construction footprint. And the purpose of this is partly to absorb excess compensation trees, but also to develop a kind of line-wide identity and improve the communities through which the ECWE is traveling. Next slide, please. Priority one. Next. These are lands that are disturbed by construction. What is our approach on impacted lands? The restoration plan sets a direction for future detailed design and future implementation of this work. And we are setting up a very high standard of quality in the design. And part of that is working collaboratively with many partners in the project. And this includes Indigenous nations and communities, stakeholders such as the City of Toronto and TRCA and MTO. It also means collaborating with the community. And we have heard many very valuable ideas from members of the community, and these have all been incorporated into the plan. Next. This is just a little bit of a diversion from the narrative, but it's I find history fascinating. And this is a very interesting couple of photographs. One is from 1961 and one is from 2022, and it's of the Eglinton Flats area. Now, what's interesting is how this area has evolved over time. In 1961, it was a series of market gardens, very productive, very busy, very well tended. And then later in the 70s, it reverted to the city and was developed into some of the recreational facilities that we now know. And also during that period of time, relatively short period of time, all of the vegetation that's there now developed and came about, partly through design, partly through just natural development. Next slide. And so the point of those two slides is that we are Metrolinx is part of that evolution of this area, adding another layer of infrastructure, but also improving the landscapes in the course of time. I'm going through a few slides. This is the Eglinton Flats area, showing the elevated guideway, of course, and Eglinton Avenue on the right-hand end of the slide. And on the left-hand end of the slide is the naturalized vegetation. Some of that is existing and some of it will be restored. And we will be restoring this to a full, naturalized forest, probably and hopefully even much improved over what's there now. A lack of invasive species, all indigenous species, a much more diverse collection of plants, but a full forest environment. Next slide. We do have a zone underneath the elevated guideway. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes, which is challenging, quite challenging because there are parts of the area underneath the guideway which never will receive sunlight and will receive very little moisture. So this is quite a challenge for landscape architects because as you enter into more difficult conditions like this, there are fewer and fewer plants to select from. But we're doing our very best, and we have studied this environment very carefully and will be producing designs or are producing designs which we are confident will be quite effective. Next slide. The next part of it is the public boulevard along Eglinton Avenue West. We will be restoring that to the best of our ability to recapture some of the grandeur and the greenery of the existing boulevard, which is shown in the photograph on the right. And that includes street trees, continuous sidewalk, and plantings adjacent to the elevated guideway to help screen and to provide seasonal color and texture. Next. These are overview plans of the Eglinton Flats area. Scarlet Road on the left on the image, the elevated guideway crossing the Humber River and heading towards Emmett Avenue. It's interesting to see the extent of the lands that will be restored are in the darker green, which are simply just a small portion of all of the existing vegetation within the Eglinton Flats, although significant. What's shown in dark green is the maximum amount of lands that may be impacted by construction. But as the contractors develop their detailed plans, they may not need all of that land. And so the areas that will require restoration may be even reduced further. Next slide. We're moving east, that's Jane Street in the center. We can see the elevated station at Jane. Two parts, a main entrance on one side and a secondary entrance on the east side of the street. Moving a little further, we see the entrance driveway for E. Brown Park. It's slightly realigned in order to accommodate the Jane Portal, which is the location where the guideway dives back down underground. Next slide. There's a close-up of the Jane Portal and ramp area. On the left is the realigned Fergie Brown Park driveway. the portal itself with some decorative planting, the boulevard planting along the bottom, along the Eglinton Avenue West, and then Piran Park. The project is taking over part of Piran Park in order to support construction. And these areas will be fully restored and even improved above what their existing condition is. Next slide. I mentioned that there's some challenges of the area underneath the elevated guideway. Well, we're looking at solutions to this. And one solution is to reuse the water that falls on the guideway itself in order to nourish and support the vegetation underneath the guideway. And as you can see, we're capturing that water in a kind of an area that we call a rain garden, which will support vegetation in that area. Next slide. This is you can see how the land is sculpted in order to retain the water underneath in the zone underneath the guideway. And this slide attempts to depict the kind of vegetation that we think will survive and thrive in that kind of environment. There are two deficits under the guideway. One is the lack of sunlight and one is the lack of moisture. We understand that the lack of moisture is probably the more serious um, challenge there, because there are lots of plants in the forest that quite naturally grow in shady and moist areas. That's not a problem, but shady dry is a little challenging. So if we add moisture, then we can develop a shady, moist environment, which is quite supportive of plants. Next slide. This is a plan view of a section of the elevated guideway. Working from the top, we have the full restoration of lands north of the guideway. Under the part of the guideway, we have a shady meadow, we have the rain garden, we have flowering shrubs adjacent to the sidewalk and a sunny meadow adjacent to the sidewalk as well. So that walking along the sidewalk will be a very pleasant and enjoyable experience. And we're also providing seating areas periodically along the guideway in order to provide an area for rest. Next slide. And a perspective of the elevated guideway showing, at least depicting the vegetation under the guideway and the completed public boulevard along Eglinton Avenue West. Next slide. And I'm going to pass it over to Kristen at this point.
Yep. Thanks, Peter. So I will be speaking about the improvements to lands adjacent to those that are impacted by construction. So adjacent lands are selected sites that are immediately adjacent to the ECWE project lands. They will be improved by controlling invasive species and adding native species. So this helps protect newly restored lands in the Eglinton Flats area, but in other areas as well. This slide is an example of the adjacent lands located between Piran Park and Jane Street. So the orange indicates lands adjacent to construction areas that will be undergoing restoration. So these areas may be indirectly impacted by ECWE construction in the form of things like edge effects. So restoration activities, as we've mentioned in these areas, will include invasive species management, planting of native tree and shrub species, as well as wildlife habitat creation. Next slide. So our process in selecting these lands is called naturalization, and naturalization aims to minimize the impact to these areas and improve the ecological integrity. So the process that we've taken is listed in the 5 steps on this slide. So the first step is conducting assessments in the field to determine existing conditions. So these would be things such as light, moisture, and existing species on the landscape. Step 2 is, if needed, remove and control invasive plant species. Step 3 is, of course, plant native trees and shrubs that have been selected based on the conditions we see in step 1. So light, moisture, and surrounding species. Of course, very importantly, the plantings will be monitored over time to see how successful they are and to also help us ensure their success. And step 5 is ongoing maintenance. So this includes things like the reapplication of mulch around each plant, watering, applying tree guards, continued management of invasive species, and in some cases, mowing around the plantings themselves. Next slide. So what are the goals of naturalization in these adjacent lands? So I've broken them down into short and long-term goals. So our short-term goals are establish priority areas for restoration. So this is our step 1 on the previous slide. Look at the existing conditions, look at how impacted they are by the project, and what can we do about that. The second short-term goal is invasive species removal and control. We really want to get those populations of invasive species down to more manageable numbers. Another short-term goal is the ongoing planting, monitoring, and maintenance to restore these areas. And finally, establish areas for wildlife habitat creation. Our long-term goals are to create self-sustaining ecological communities, continued monitoring maintenance as required, um, and of course, establish wildlife habitat. Next slide, please. So we've been talking a lot about invasive plant species, and there's quite a few within the project area. These include garlic mustard, Phragmites, buckthorn, and dog strangling vine. There are a variety of methods available to control and or treat best management practices for these species that will be referenced and applied. City of Toronto also has specific guidelines for the management of invasive species. It's important to note that control of invasive species is typically completed in stages and takes a long time. Um, so typically, with most of these species, you might not see results until year 3 of management, depending on which species and management regime is used. And on the slide, just an example of one of these, this is garlic mustard. Next slide, please. And we've also talked a little bit about creating wildlife habitat in these areas. So one way to do that is coarse woody debris. So that means leaving logs on the landscape. Species such as the garter snake, which is shown on the right, will use these, as well as other wildlife. Something else we can do and identify is leave snag trees. So these are dead trees with the bark still on them. Of course, this will only be done in areas where it is safe to do so. So species such as the pileated woodpecker and other cavity nesting birds might use these as habitat. Girdling of invasive trees as a means of control and habitat creation. So girdling is a method that can be applied to invasive tree species where the base of the trunk of the tree is girdled with a hand tool or a chainsaw, and in some cases herbicide might be applied, and this kind of increases the speed of decay of the tree, but also allows it to decay somewhat naturally over time, staying on the landscape and providing services for wildlife. And finally, we'll be choosing plant species that produce food for wildlife. So these include species like serviceberry, raspberries, oak, and there's countless others that we've incorporated in our plans to create food and habitat for wildlife. Next slide, please. I'll pass it back to Peter.
Thank you, Kristen. The next part of the presentation is about priority 3, and that's about enhancing landscapes beyond the construction zone, enhancing landscapes that are already existing, are already valuable, and will not be touched by construction. Why is Metrolinx interested in doing this? The primary reason is to provide a community benefit to improve the general community in order to improve the routes and methods that people use to get to transit, to get to the stations. And a secondary benefit is to consume some of the additional compensation trees that cannot be accommodated on site. So much of the other additional landscape improvements will involve tree planting. Next slide, please. I mentioned that the ECWE restoration plan is line-wide. It goes all the way from Eglinton Flats to Renfrew Station, including all the stations and ancillary buildings. But in order to develop a kind of overall vision for the landscape that that Metrolinx is impacting or influencing, we've developed a kind of line-wide vision, we call it. And this part of Eglinton Avenue West is very interesting. It's very unique in that it's very green and park-like. It's a very beautiful street to drive along. It's a high-speed, large arterial, but nonetheless, it's very attractive and very beautiful. And it extends, there's a continuous network of green connections extending from Eglinton Flats in the east along the south side of Eglinton, together with open treed landscapes and cycle path and the sidewalk, all a beautiful kind of connection, and that extends all the way to Centennial Park. So we have this kind of almost a dumbbell kind of pattern, which is very interesting and is deserving of support and reinforcement. The South Side Greenway, we call it, on the south side of Eglinton, it also connects into a series of north-south streams that provide additional recreational opportunities, not only in their own right, but in terms of circulation and walking paths, recreational trails. So it's the Southside Greenway and Eglinton Flats that we're really looking at closely, and these sites are within close proximity of the ECWE project to the stations, and so there's a direct kind of connection, a direct synergy between among these landscapes. Next slide. So, what sort of improvements do we propose? Well, some of them are related to community, and these are opportunities to enhance amenities. And this is about seating and about storytelling, about interpretation of natural and cultural features of the community, and to just simply providing things that people need in order to enjoy open spaces and park spaces. One of the key features that we're suggesting is we call a seating nook, which is a little comfortable seating area off, usually connected with the sidewalk or with a multi-use pathway. That includes a series of panels that are all about storytelling of the indigenous history in the area, the cultural and natural history of the area, which is really quite unique. Next slide. The next sort of thrust is to develop character, to enhance the unique visual quality of the Southside Greenway and Eglinton Flats. And one specific proposal we have is to develop distinctive plantings at each of the major cross sections. We're thinking of dense plantings of white birch and poplar with colorful ground covers that will just help articulate the experience of moving along Eglinton Avenue West. Next slide. The third component, which is extremely important and becoming more and more important, is about promoting biodiversity. In the face of climate change, this is becoming much more important. Landscapes that are biodiverse are much better at self-supporting. They're much more resilient to any kind of climate change or temperature change. They're also beautiful. They're also very colorful. They change with the seasons, and they add a tremendous amount of delight to moving along multi-use pathways or sidewalks. Next slide, please. Next slide. Let's begin with Piran Park. Piran Park is an extremely important open space park within the heart of Mount Dennis. Metrolinx is becoming very interested in the possibilities of making significant improvements to Piran Park. We have been in very close touch with members of the community who support this initiative. And that may include, would definitely include establishing full accessibility for all users, but also providing opportunities for older children, improving some of the facilities that are there now, and possibly adding some new facilities. This whole idea is very much in the beginnings of thinking about, and will obviously involve coordination with the City of Toronto, who owns the park. But there's a considerable amount of interest all around to generate improvements to Pierin Park. Next slide. Another possible, we call this a demonstration plan. It's not a detailed plan. It's not something that's carved in stone by any means as a project, but it's a demonstration project of what kinds of improvements might benefit the South Side Greenway. In this case, at Eglinton at Royal York, that's Buttonwood Park on the right-hand end of the image. And there's a possibility here of really making some significant improvements to this landscape. It's a beautiful landscape already, but it can be more. Everything that we're proposing will protect and enhance existing vegetation. There is no apart from some limited invasive management, we're very interested in trying to support and improve what's there now rather than changing it. So we're looking at a series of opportunities of what we call mini forests, of meadowlands, seeding nooks, and other amenities and features that will, in a very gentle, kind of understated way, improve these landscapes and make them even more enjoyable. Next slide. Now we're looking at Eglinton, south side of Eglinton at Martin Grove and Martin Grove Collegiate. There's quite a bit of land in this area, which could be improved through the development of meadows, a corner feature to identify the intersection, mini forests to increase diversity and increase climate cooling and climate control, and then seating nooks and other public amenities in order to improve the enjoyment of people passing by. Next slide. Well, thank you. That's the end of my part of the presentation. We're going to pass it over to Mihal, who's going to talk about the nuts and bolts of construction. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Move on to the next slide, please. Yeah, we'll take you through some construction updates. So what we see here is basically a plan view map taking us from Renford all the way to Mount Dennis at the top. And really Renford to Scarlett is the first advanced contract. So that's Advanced Tunnel 1. And then between Scarlett and Jane, that's the second advanced contract. That's the elevated guideway. And then finally, we have the third advanced contract, which is Jane to Mount Dennis, also known as Advanced Tunnel 2. And we see here then on the graph just below it how these contracts are progressing with respect to time. So we know that the first contract, the Advanced Tunnel 1, is well underway. And in fact, later this week, we're hoping for the first TBM to make breakthrough at Scarlett Portal. So that's a significant milestone for that part of the project. The next two advanced contracts that we have are Elevated Guideway and the Advanced Tunnel Contract 2. So they are both under construction at the moment. Advanced Tunnel Contract 2 a little bit ahead. You'll notice some works around the Pierin Park and Jane Portal area, and also very soon, in a month or so, we hope to commission the first aspect of this project, which is a south-side cycle track linking all the way from Jane eventually onto Black Creek. So both of those contracts are underway at the moment. And then in the last line here, we see the stations, rail, and systems contract. So the first three contracts are advanced. They basically build the concrete shell. And that last contract then knits everything together. So it's all of our stations, all of our track work, and then all of the systems to go with that. So it's currently out to the market for procurement at the moment. And very soon we'll be entering into a collaborative period of design with the contractor, and that will hoping for works to start around 2027 for the SRS contract and run until 2031 when we'll have the opening then. So next slide, please. Thank you. I mentioned on the previous slide that you may have noticed some works around the Jane Portal area. So just providing a little bit more information on that. On the left-hand side here, we see some bullet points about the works at Jane Portal. So it's primarily site preparation work. So this is where the tunnel will be launched from and make its way up to Mount Dennis station. So you'll notice some machinery and some office set up in this area. And also another feature in this area is that the MUP is open at the moment. So the site is split in two, and basically this MUP is dividing it like such. So before that MUP can be closed, we have to construct a south side cycle track, which basically links Jane Street all the way to Black Creek. So in order to kind of speed that up and open it to the public, what we'd like to do is to take that in two phases. And the first phase is where we go from Jane up to Weston, and then ultimately we'll take it from Weston to Black Creek. So you'll notice some works on the south side that have been constructed, and the photo that we see here is an example of a bus platform that's been developed with some tactile pavers on the left and the right. So next slide, please. I also mentioned Advanced Tunnel Contract 1. So we're expecting a significant milestone at the end of the week for this, where the first tunneling machine, a TBM or tunnel boring machine, will make a breakthrough at Scarlet Portal. And so an update on some other works are head walls. So a head wall is basically the eastern and the western wall of stations. So this is where the tunnel kind of breaks through and marks the extent of that. So these are complete at Martin Grove, Kipling, Islington and Royal York, and also for some of our emergency exit buildings as well too. Another key feature that we have for the tunnels is a cross passage. So this is basically a small tunnel that links our two primary tunnels. And the reason for this, if something was to happen in one tunnel, it allows safe passage from our passengers to move from one tunnel into the other tunnel and then they make their way safely either to a station or to an emergency exit building. So these are typically located between stations. And these are complete at Renford and Martin Grove. And the next ones then that we're constructing are the ones that are east of Martin Grove, so still underway for our cross passages. So next slide, please. And this is just a look ahead. So early this year, there'll be some utility works at Scarlet Station. Namely moving some overhead cables underground. Also, you'll notice that the cycle track works will be continuing at pace, so commissioning for the first phase and then continuing on with constructing the second phase. And then another event just to take note of is a Meet the Builders event for the second part of the tunneling works that's planned for spring of this year. A little bit later in the year, so mid-2024, bringing us towards the fall, the Stations Rail and Systems contract that was released, the RFP will be released in August. You'll also notice some construction at the Jane Portal, and construction activities that will be underway here is grading and piling. Once the piling is complete, then we can excavate, and then once the excavation is complete, we can set up the concrete works and then start tunneling after that point. There's also some community walks to look out for between spring and October, and what Peter and Kristen were speaking about earlier with the restoration design. So that collaborative effort with our community, with our stakeholders, with our Indigenous communities as well too. That will be reaching a 90% completion stage later this year. And we're hoping to have another open house then to share the results and outcome of that as well too. We have again the station's RFP release in August and then some community events in the summer. And finally, the cross passages, which you mentioned on the previous slide, are aiming to complete in fall 2024. Next slide, please. So this is also some tools that we just like to bring to your attention and show you a preview today. And very shortly, we'll be uploading them to the website so you can take a look back in your own time and in a little bit more detail. But just to, I say, give a preview and just talk through the context of this. So we really wanted to show objectively what the guide web would look and sound like. So we thought there was three kind of key ways that we could communicate this. Next slide, please. So the three ways that we thought about was one, to do an aerial animation. And around this time last year, we commissioned a drone survey, and we'll look at the results of that very shortly. The second thing that we have is a verified photographic view. So these are basically snapshots that are taken. So our team were able to go out and photograph this area and then basically superimpose what the guideway would look like. And in order to be fully transparent, we don't just jump straight to the very end. We show what it looks like now, what it looks like at peak construction, what it looks like at 5 years, and also 30 years, just to kind of paint that true picture. And then finally, we have an immersive video, which basically is like the photographic view, but we layer on all of the acoustics as well too, so you can look and hear what the guideway will sound like. So next slide, please. So this is a plan view that we have, and I think if you just click the next button, please, it'll bring up some of the locations that we've covered off here. So the first ones that you'll see, we have 6 locations here, ranging from Richview in the east, or in the west, I apologise, to Scarlet Road, the Eglinton Flats playing pitches, the Fergie Brown Park cricket pitch, Piran Park, and Eglinton Avenue, just across the road from the Jane Portal. So all of these locations will be covered, and we'll give a snapshot of some of these here later today. Um, you'll notice the ones with the video camera and the little sound animation and image beside them. They're the immersive experiences where you can hear and see what the video looks like. The other ones that you see here in blue with the eye symbol, they're the photographic views. So they're the ones that are taken during construction, 5 years after construction, and 30 years after construction. And then you see the red dashed line is the aerial animation. So if you click the next slide, please, I think it'll bring us to the aerial animation. Okay, and sorry, Louise, could you click on this, please? I think it may play. Thank you very much. So as I mentioned, this was captured last year, and this was drone footage that we had. So we're starting here in the west, and we can see Scarlet Portal, and we can also see the realigned Eglinton Avenue diversion. The track comes and then it separates out a little bit to accommodate Scarlet Station, and a little bit hard to see, but you may just pick it up, is the green roof. So this is to help with pollutants and also with building energy costs. So it's a greener solution that we've implemented for Scarlet Station. And then this image here is just coming across the Humber River, and of note in this image, you'll see that the piers clear span the river, so we don't impact upon the river at all. So that was a requirement that we had in our contract. Another key feature is that all of the accessways to these parks highlighted in blue here, they will remain open throughout construction. So that's one other requirement that we have in our contract. And these dashed lines are showing the extent of construction, so coming out to the curb line and then a little bit into the parks. This is our station that we see here at Jane Station. So approaching it, and we have the pocket track section, this triple track section here, just to the west of Jane Station. And then just after, you may make out a double crossover just to the east of the station as well too, to account for increased ridership that we have there. This is a view looking north. So we see Tuppan Pond in the foreground and the playing pitches. And we can see Jane Station and the realigned access into Fergie Brown Park just towards the right here. And you might just pick it up, but we have a bus stop and the cycle track shown here on the right-hand side. So that'll be constructed. And we have the realigned Fergie Brown Park that was just highlighted in blue there as well. So that's basically our aerial animation. As we say, please feel free to look at that in your own time as well too, and closer examination. So I think we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is what the photographic verified photographic view looks like. So this is on the playing pitches. So we're standing here on the rugby or soccer pitches, and we're looking south. And this is where Jane Station will go, and this was taken around July last year. So we see all of the foliage and vegetation in full bloom. If we go to the next slide, it shows what it looks like in 5 years post construction. And sorry, on the website as well too, we will have it during construction. So the type of trees that you see here and the rate of growth, that was all checked with our arborists, with Christian, and our landscape architects with Peter as well too. So what you see here matches up with the restoration plans that we're developing and will be implementing. So this is what it looks like after 5 years. And then after 30 years, I think on the next slide, it shows that this vegetation has taken hold and acts as a natural screening for that guideway from the park here. So that's what the verified photographic view looks like. And I think our last slide here, and I may just have to take control for a moment, Louisa, just to share my screen. Oh, thank you very much. This is great. So this is at Scarlet Road. Again, this was captured in July last year. So this is what it looks like now. You'll see a little bit more action. But this is superimposing what it will look like in 30 years when the guideway is built. And very soon, you just be about able to make it out in kind of 5 or 6 seconds or so. I'll see a train approaching here from the west. That's approaching here from the left. That's heading westbound. So the sound is synced, and I'll let that play. We might be missing it. It's if you're playing it, just turn up the volume a little bit just to hear it. But the sound that we have here, this was basically taken. We had a team go out and go to similar LRT stations in Waterloo and around the Toronto area and stand at different distances from these trains to pick up the acoustic recordings, and then also to capture the ambient sound as well too. We went to all of these locations, so we're able to sync these and layer them onto the videos that we have as well too. So they're just three of the tools that we have: the aerial animation, the verified photographic views, and the immersive experience to help you objectively understand and see what the guideway will look and sound like. And so if we go to the next slide, please, I think that brings us through our content and onto the panel discussion. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Mihal. I'll take it from here. So we'd like to move into our question and answer portion of today's meeting. So I invite you again to submit a question. Just visit www.metrolinx.ca/ecwe_events and click on today's event, and you can submit your question at the bottom of the page there. Before we get into the questions, I do want to let you know about an event that's happening this weekend. We have a tree giveaway, so you can pick up a tree or shrub to take home for free this Saturday, April 27th, between 9:30 and 9:30 a.m. and 12 p.m. at Silver Creek Park. You'll find more details on that same link that's posted on your screen there. All right, and with that, we will get into our first question. Why does the route need to be elevated between Scarlet Road and Jane Street? Why can't it be tunneled like the rest of the line? I'll throw that over to Deanne to answer.
Thanks, Amin, and good evening, everyone. The alignment was set for this project close to 2 years ago, and it was supported by a business case that was very detailed and looked at many factors, including impacts and costs. And one of the big barriers or hurdles was the Humber River and the Humber River sort of floodplain and what was required in terms of protection from it. So the deeper you go, the more costly a project. Also, we started the ACT1, our first tunnel, which is almost at Scarlet. So any changes to that alignment now, the tunnels have been going since the business case and since procurement and since we had a contractor on board. So any changes to that technology or that overpass to a tunnel now would require undoing construction that's already almost complete. So, we get sort of caught up with this question, but it is multifaceted and it's sort of many components to it. But it was considered in the business case and in the contracting of these elements. Thanks. Mom, you're muted. I think you're talking in the
Sorry
chat.
about that. You can stay on though, because the next question is also for you. It is, how many LRT vehicles will be added to the extension, and will it be included in the total budgets?
That work is currently being completed right now with updates to the business plans. And we are looking at the modeling. So we understand that to procure vehicles, we need 6 to 8 years. With the completion in 2031, we're working on that work right now to finalize and be able to provide that sort of number to you. But as of yet, it has not been solidified. But it will be part of this project because it is needed for service.
Okay, thank you. The next one is for you, Mihal. Are there any crossovers in the tunnel to allow short-haul train operation?
Yeah, thanks, Aman. We can maybe point to the crossovers that we have at Jane Station. So just to the east and just to the west of Jane Station, we have the ability to cross tracks. So the one to the east is a double crossover, and then the one to the west is a pocket track, which is basically 3 tracks. And the reason you have two then is a little bit of redundancy. If one breaks, you can still switch back. And the reason for Jane Station as well is that we see from the numbers and the studies that were completed is that there's an increased ridership to the east of Jane into downtown. So that's why it's located at Jane Station.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Um, Next question. What are you doing to beautify the parklands after construction? This one over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Aman. Well, in my presentation, we talked about um, a number of measures that we're taking to beautify the parks, and the first one is restoration of impacted lands. And these will be brought back to a condition which is even better than what's there now. Eventually, it will take time for sure. But even an emerging woodland is very beautiful at all stages, even at the 5 year, and then at the 30 year, and then at the 50 year, which is what we see out there now. At all stages, it's beautiful. We're also working on the parks. We're working on Piran Park, and we'll be improving that in a number of different ways in order to make it more sustainable, more comfortable for people, and more interesting and fun for kids. That's certainly the bottom line, but also sustainable and maintainable. On a line-wide basis, we're making improvements at all of the, well, we're developing landscapes associated with all of the stations to make it easier for people to get to the station, make it more comfortable when you're there and waiting for a cab or waiting for a pickup. And then on the line-wide improvements, we're hoping to improve existing landscapes, which are already very high quality, in order to make them more comfortable, more beautiful, and more sustainable. Thank you, Aman.
Thank you, Peter. The next question here is for Kaylin. What do you do with trees after you cut them down?
Hi, thanks for the question. So we do a few different things with trees that have to be removed for the project. So this Eglinton Crosstown West Extension project follows guidance from Metrolinx's vegetation guidelines. And the guidelines, which are published on our website, have a section on options and sustainability objectives for tree end use. So some of the things that we do with wood that is left over from tree removals is we can work closely with conservation authorities and other municipal partners to try to repurpose the trees that we need to remove in sustainable ways. So sometimes wood is donated to the community for whatever they want to use it for. It could be ecological and commercial uses, it could be local art, habitat restoration projects. We also have the option to partner with local college woodworking programs and mill the wood if it's of particularly high value, like some hardwood trees are. And then some of the wood that doesn't qualify for end use, for example, there's some trees that have regulated invasive species in them, like emerald ash borer. We can't take those away from the site, so those are mulched on site and they are used in the construction area as a ground cover.
Thank you, Kaylin. The next question we have here is, how will the elevated guideway impact the Humber River? That's over to you, Mihal.
Let's come off mute. Thank you, Aman. Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a really good question. I think maybe to answer that question, we could maybe think about two kind of stages or two scenarios. One is the short term during construction and what measures will be taken, and then two is the long term. So I think in the short term, we've had to work very closely with TRC and the regulatory authorities in this area, just to ensure that the construction methods that are proposed are satisfactory and meet all of their requirements. So things like erosion and sediment control measures will be put in place, that all of the groundwater or any water that falls will be diverted off and treated and then discharged appropriately. So that's it in the short term. As I say, we have to get permits from all of these agencies before the work can even be permitted to proceed. And then in the long term, I guess what we can do again, working with these agencies, we have a minimum setback of 7.3 meters from the bank of the Humber River, where there can be no physical infrastructure in this area. So you'll note in that aerial animation that we have the two piers for the Humber Bridge are set back away from the river to protect the Humber River. Thanks, Aman.
Thank you. You can stay on because the next one is also for you. How are you ensuring that the elevated guideway will be safe?
Oh, yes, sorry. I think yes, the elevator guide. We've probably worked on this with quite a lot of our kind of experts throughout. So we looked at kind of many facets of this due to safety insurance. So while we have kind of different advanced contracts tying in with the SRS, we've looked at designing for the full scale of this throughout the full lifetime. So all of those systems that we have, and that's kind of fully thought out, and we've protected and space-proof for that in the early contracts. So it's a pretty rigorous process in terms of that safety assurance process that we go through in order to ensure that the system is reliable, is redundant, and is safe. Thanks, man. I think you may be on mute.
Always fighting with the mute. You can stay on because the next one is also for you. For the underground construction, how many lanes will be closed on Eglinton Avenue and how long do you expect them to be closed off?
Yeah, maybe we can speak to this in terms of the construction that generally runs between Scarlett and Jane. So as a general principle or as a general rule, the construction doesn't impinge on the roadway. So the southern boundary that we have basically comes as far as the curb line of Eglinton. For some localized instances, things like utility works tying into existing infrastructure, there would be local diversions just for those works to be done. But that would be sought through City of Toronto, and they would ensure that it's only closed for the minimum amount of time and done so in a safe manner. And as I mentioned, maybe to give an idea in terms of the closures, basically the access to Fergie Round Park is maintained at all times. So that means between Jane and Eglinton, that access way between Jane and Fergie Round Park is maintained open, the sidewalk. But the area between Jane and Emmet, that will be closed off. So our pedestrians would have to use the south side cycle track in that case, and then use the pedestrian crossing at Emmet. And then similarly from Emmet, just bringing us up to the Humber Bridge, and that would be closed a little bit too. So as I say, as a general rule is the construction sites just come as far as Eglinton Avenue curb line and don't impinge on that. But in localized instances like utility works, they would have to have some short-term lane closures. Thank you, man.
Great, thank you. The next question here is for Deanne. Will there be bike parking at each station?
Thanks, Simon. Yes, there will be 40 bike spots or bike parking spots at each station. And at Merton Grove and Rail York, there will be integrated secure bike rooms, which will also have 32 bike sort of parking locations or bike spots. And then there will be, we're currently in discussions with the City of Toronto and their bike share program about looking for opportunities for additional sort of bike share within close proximity to the station, though maybe not necessarily on station property, but within the city boulevard. So we can keep you posted on that as those advance, but lots of bike parking and lots of bike connections to support the station environment.
Okay, thank you, Deanne. We'll go over to you, Mihal. Next one is for you. You mentioned cross tunnel pathway is completed between Runforth and Martin Grove. Does that imply that tunneling is also complete?
Thanks, Aman, and thank you for the question. So in terms of tunneling, there's always maybe a lag. So you have two tunnel boring machines in this instance. So how it works is you have the tunnel boring machine number one is the first to go ahead. Then you have a little bit of a lag back to the second tunnel boring machine, and then another lag back to the cross passages. So as I mentioned, the first tunnel boring machine, we're anticipating it will make breakthrough at the end of this week. And then a few weeks later, the second tunnel boring machine will make its breakthrough at Scarlet Station. And once that's complete and the tunnels are stable, then we'll be able to finish off the cross passages linking those two tunnels. So as I say, we finish tunneling first, and then later this summer, towards the fall, we'll finish the cross passages. Thanks, Amanda.
Great, you're very popular because we have another one for you. Are you planning to use the same two TBMs for the east tunnels?
Good question. So in terms of when this went to the market, we allowed for both options, both the tunnel boring machines or a kind of a more kind of manual method, which is also referred to as the sequential excavation method or mined tunneling. And it's a trade-off really between a number of factors, like the length of the tunnel is probably the biggest one really. And what we see is that the eastern tunnel, it's that bit shorter. It's about 500 meters long compared to the first tunnel, which is 6 kilometers. And for those shorter tunnels, what's kind of more efficient and more adaptable is to use that mined or sequential excavation method. So in short, the eastern tunnel will not be constructed with a TBM or a machine. It will be constructed with the sequential excavation method. So yeah.
Thank you, Mihal. The next question here is, what will the stations look like? Will they be accessible? So we do have that information available on our website under the What We're Building tab at the top, where there are renderings of each of the stations and more information on each of the stations. So I encourage you to check that out. That's the same website that you've used to access this open house. You just select the What We're Building tab there. All right, the next question after that one is it's more of a statement, but I'll hand it over to you, Mihal, and or Peter. Absolutely none of the runoff from the gateway should enter the Humber River. Please give more details on how you will ensure this pollution will not enter the Humber. I am not seeing enough protection in your presentation.
Thank you, man. Peter, maybe I could start and pass it over to you if that sounds okay. Thank you. I guess it's a really good comment, first of all, to note, and something that we're thinking quite closely about. So what Peter mentioned is just a kind of a schematic of what we're looking at, and currently working with City of Toronto and TRCA to fully develop this. But we have a number of features in our guideway, so catch basins, just to pick up any runoff that we have at the top of the deck, also the bottom of the deck, and then it feeds into the rain garden. So in terms of before it makes its way back to the Humber River and maintains that water balance, we look at a couple of features in terms of the quality of the water. So we use things like super pipes to kind of hold back and let any sediment settle out. We also look at the quantity, or if you get an influx of water, we try and hold that back as well too, and kind of let it flow out in a slower pace. So that's the quantity control. And then also, I think, Peter, maybe you'll be able to speak to the benefits of this rain garden as well too, kind of acting as a natural filter too for this runoff.
Sure. In fact, I'd even like to roll back a little bit further and go right to the top, up onto the guideway, like what kind of water is actually coming off the guideway. We've had many discussions about this, and apparently that water coming down from the guideway is actually going to be really quite clean. First of all, there is no salt being used on the guideway, unlike Eglinton Avenue, which is heavily salted in the winter. There's no salt on the guideway. And also, very important measures are being taken to ensure that the trains produce no noxious materials of any sort. They have now a very specialized environmentally friendly kind of lubricant, which they use on the trains to obviously lubricate all the moving parts. But these products are quite environmentally friendly and do not impact the quality of water at all. The water coming down off the guideway will go into the rain gardens. It will sit there for quite a while until it's fully absorbed by the plants. And so the plants are taking up much of the water. Any excess water during a very heavy downpour, a very heavy rainstorm, will go into a pipe which is very carefully sized and leads down into the existing ditch, which is at the bottom of the slope on the north side of Eglinton. And these pipes are very carefully calibrated in order to exactly mimic the existing situation, so that the existing swales at the bottom of the slope will carry no more water than they do now, even in a very, very large event. And that water will carry along the swale. The swales are vegetated, and the vegetation helps clean the water. There's a sandy bottom that helps filter it. So by the time the water gets to the Humber River, it is really quite clean and meets all of the TRCA requirements for water handling. And the TRCA are extremely demanding in that regard. So we're very confident that no more, but also just as importantly, no less water will be going to the Humber, and that water will be of quite high quality.
Okay, thank you, Peter and Mihal. Our next question here is for Deanne. What percentage of design completion is the elevated guideway at? What provision in the agreements for design changes?
Thanks, Alman. We're currently at 30% in the design development of the guideway with our contractor. It's a collaborative and process where we're working to optimize the reference concept design as we go. In terms of design change, there's been a lot of I'd say information or misinformation out there or questioning, which is fine and great. I just want to point out to the public tonight, like there was a members motion by the local councillor. It's on the city's website. It went to the February 12th Infrastructure and Environment Committee, and it was asked for city staff to sort of look at this exact question. And to verify that, we are sort of doing our due diligence and coming out with sort of the best solutions for the community and for this project. And Ashley Curtis, the Deputy General Manager for Transportation, his sort of conclusion on it is based on the comprehensive review of the setbacks and considerations outlined in this report, is evident that setback reductions have already been made to optimize the placement of the guideway. The space allowances include buffer spaces necessary to accommodate signage, utility posts, and other essential infrastructure, and for separation between uses, sidewalk, multi-use pathways. Without these buffers, we risk compromising the effectiveness and safety of our roadways. Any further reductions of the setbacks is not feasible without compromising safety and operational efficiency. So we have, been sharing, we've been going through this, and we've had city staff verify with their experts that, the placement is optimized. Given that city building is challenging and we're trying to balance a whole bunch of competing interests in this area. So at this point, we don't see any changes to the design placement of the guideway. Thanks.
Thank you, Deanne. And the next one here is for Kaylin or Kristen. How will you make sure the guideway blends in with the natural area? Are there going to be trees around the guideway to make sure that they blend in with the surroundings?
Hi, so thanks for this question. I'm kind of thinking back to the presentation and the renderings that were shown earlier, so I'll be referencing back to some of those. So we are planning for vegetation and trees on both sides of the guideway, as well as vegetation and plants underneath it. As Peter mentioned earlier about the careful selection that they've been doing about what plants can survive and thrive under the guideway. So the purpose of the vegetation around the guideway, it's kind of multifold. One is for screening of the guideway and also public realm. So if you can recall earlier, we have those street trees going back as well. Also for tying into the existing treed areas in the parks, especially north of the guideway in Eglinton Flats and Fergie Brown. And then also we're planning to plant as many plants and trees that we can fit in the area as well. And that has a third benefit of helping us reach our Metrolinx vegetation compensation and replacement targets. So the vegetation that the contractor will plant will be a mixture of small pots and caliper sized trees. And all of this is planned to grow up and fill in over time. And then as you saw in the virtual renderings from earlier, the trees are expected to be fully grown within 2 to 3 decades.
Great. Thank you, Kaylin. Great. If you have any questions, please continue submitting them to www.metrolinx.ca/ecwe_events. Maybe this one for you, Deanne. When will the Eglinton Crosstown LRT be completed?
We've said the same thing. In every public meeting we've had, that we continue to provide updates on sort of 5 main streams of the sort of most critical work, including remaining construction, testing, commissioning, safety, and reliability. And that can be all sort of accessed at the Crosstown LRT website. And I think we can post the link to that in our information. So we can direct people to that, but all updates, it's a separate project, and all the updates are under that project.
All right. Thank you, Deanne. We have one about road access off Eglinton. So will the road access off Eglinton to West Park Hospital be maintained during construction operations? I believe it will, but Mihal, are you able to confirm?
Yep, you got it, Aman. That'll be maintained throughout construction.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're just waiting for more questions to come in. Again, the link, the URL is on the screen for you to submit your questions, so please continue to do so. Okay, we've got one here. Was there consideration made to build the elevated sections at street level? Why are these sections elevated? It's over to Mihal.
Thank you, man. I think this goes back a little bit to the question we had earlier in terms of the alignment. So I guess, yeah, the reason they're elevated in short and at this level is to get over Scarlet Road and also Jane Street. So if you imagine there's buses or fire trucks that need to go, and they basically have to be high enough just to allow all of those vehicles to move. If it was to be at street level, it would slow down the whole network and then kind of increase the risk of some clashes with traffic. So that's the kind of primary reason why they're elevated and elevated to that height. So, man.
Thank you. Okay. We've got one here. Can new trees be planted directly in areas from which they were removed? That's over to you, Deanne.
To the best of our ability, we are replanting it. We're prioritizing planting in the areas that have experienced the greatest amount of tree loss. We sort of have we have tables and that look at this about where we're losing trees across the line, and we have corresponding tables about where we're replanting. That was sort of the idea of the adjacent lands in Fergie Brown Park, as well as the offsite sort of compensation within the ravine. So we are trying to align those two objectives as we develop this plan.
Okay, great, thank you. We've got one here. Is there any concern about the green roofs on stations given the bird problem the TTC has experienced at Leslie Barnes? Deanne, do you want to take this? I can maybe start off just to say that we can take this one back.
I
To
don't know
confirm.
what's happening at Leslie Barnes with the birds. But I think we have to take this back and find out what these crazy birds are doing. So we'll have to get back to you on this one and come and give you an answer at a future consultation.
Yeah, and if you want to email us so that we can look into this for you, it's eglintonwest@metrolinx.com. So please, any details you've got, let us know, and we can take this one back. As our station's contract will go through a progressive design stage, and then we can incorporate this feedback. But yes, we'd love to hear from you. Please email us.
In terms of working with the Toronto Green Standard and the Green Roof Bylaw, I haven't heard of out of control birds as of yet, but there's always something new to learn in city building. So I'm excited about this one.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think we need to definitely do more research on this one, like Deanne and Amon said, but just at first blush, we may not have the same problems that Leslie Barnes are having because of how close to the lake they are. They seem to be on like a migratory or passover route for certain birds, particularly possibly gulls. Also, I can say that the footprint of our station green roofs seem to be like they're going to be a lot smaller than the Leslie Barnes ones, which are quite large. So those are, I guess, two things we can leave you with tonight as we go back and take this question back and do more research.
Okay, thank you, Kayla and Deanne. Thank you for that question. Our next question here is, why are you providing so much parking? Can we save more green space by eliminating parking? I think I heard 40 at Jane Street, and that's for you, Deanne.
I think it was related to bike parking. So there's no car parking at the stations. There is wheel trans and there's an accessible loading. There's no parking being provided at our stations, but there is 40 bike parking being provided in the transit plaza at the stations. So apologies if anyone misheard me.
Great, thank you. All right, we've got about 10 more minutes. So if anyone has any questions, again, the link, the URL is on the screen. Please submit your questions at the bottom of that page. All right, we've got one. How is integration to Mount Dennis expected to occur? Will it be continuous service or will you have to change trains between east and west? Is there any thought on how integration between the two can occur? I'll toss this one over to you, Deanne.
So the line is planned as an extension of the existing crosstown. And so it's meant to be continuous, just similar to how we've extended York University line up to York University and up to Downsview. But we're working on the integration right now, and we will to bring back updates as we move forward with that.
Thank you. If you've got a question, again, the URL is on the screen and you'll have to scroll to the bottom of the page to access Slido and submit your question. Right, we've got one here that we will not be able to address today, but we will get back to you or bring some information over to a future event. And that's that question about ensuring water quality and validating some of the information that we've shared here tonight. So we will bring that back, either post it on our webpage in the next couple of days, or we'll bring that back to a future open house. And I'm just gonna take a moment again to let everybody know if people are dropping off that we do have a tree giveaway event this Saturday from 9:30 to 12, 9:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. at Silver Creek Park. There's more detail on our event page, the www.metrolinx.com/ECWE_events. You'll have more detail there, but you can pick up a tree or a shrub to take home with you for free. And this event is in collaboration with the TRCA. Right, we've got one here. It's a follow-up question to what Deanne was talking about. The tie-in works from Mount Dennis Station to ECLRT. And that is, will that cause disruption in LRT service at Mount Dennis? That's for Mihal or Deanne.
Deanne, do you want to go ahead first, and maybe I can speak to the tie-in then afterwards?
I was going to say, Michal, you get to do the tie-in, and then I'll
Okay.
speak to us working collaboratively with the other team. But I can start with, we're working collaboratively with the other team to, once the station opens, to maintain access to the station with no disruptions to our customers. And maybe Michal can explain how tie-in happens.
Yes, thanks, Deanne. That sounds great. Yeah, maybe just for a little bit of context, what we have at the moment constructed at Mount Dennis, we have the station platform itself, and then about 90 to 100 meters west of that, we have tail tracks. So this is runoff tail tracks for storing vehicles or for overrun. And so where we make the tie-in is at the very western end. So we won't be impacting the station platform itself. It's kind of a localized zone, 10 meters or so at the very western end. And again, that's about 100 meters to the west of the station platform. So no impact on station operations is envisaged. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Mihal. Right, we've got one question here. You have so many specialists, but not a wildlife specialist. This is a major bird and butterfly migratory path. The list of wildlife that call this home is huge. I am not convinced they are being looked after very well. Did you contact FLAP? FLAP?
Flap. So FLAP is actually one of the stakeholders in the Toronto Green Standard, and sort of integral in helping to develop uh, some of the work that was developed in terms of uh, how you do fritting on glazing, how you do lighting after hours, what species planting is sort of recommended for green roofs for food sources and whatnot and perching. So the Toronto Green Standard and the existing policy framework actually integrates their work and research into it. But you know, we're not opposed to having a separate meeting with them to ensure that our stations um, those principles. So we can take that back and 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 have a and connect with them. But we are meeting the Toronto Green Standard where those principles and their work is heavily integrated, just for your information.
Does anyone have anything to add there? Okay. Right, I think we can wrap it up here, but if there are any questions that have been left unanswered, we will take those back and post answers to our website. Thank you again for your interest and the great questions. And again, we've got a tree giveaway this Saturday, April 27th, between 9:30 a.m. and 12 p.m. at Silver Creek Park, where you can pick up a free tree or shrub. So please stop by, say hi, and pick up a tree or shrub. Again, if we didn't get to your question tonight, please do know that it is important to us and we will be posting the answers to all of your questions on our website in the next 2 weeks. There are many ways you can continue to engage, including visiting our community office, which is at 326 Scarlett Road. That's on the screen there, or giving us a call or sending us an email. Our contact information is also on the screen there. Once again, thank you for your participation tonight, and thank you to all of our panelists and our presenters. We look forward to meeting with you again, and have a great night.